stop working. You never stop. Oh, even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. Oh, even when I don't feel it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. Oh, 'cause waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are, yeah. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Oh, that is who you are. 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 Oh, we believe it. That is who you are. Oh, that is who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are.
Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise His name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise His name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. Oh Lord our God.
Hey, thanks for joining us as we jump into week 3, as we look at the life of David on a series called How to Ruin Your Life and Finding Forgiveness When You Do. You might want to open the Bible tab because we're going to be looking at Psalm number 51 today, which is a psalm that David wrote in connection with this story that we've been journeying with his fall with Bathsheba, his confrontation with the prophet Nathan. And today we're going to get a chance to look at the redemption that David experienced on the other side of that. Here's what I love about the life of David is he's easy to relate to in some ways because we can all connect. We can all understand how David fell into the trap of ruining his life. Here's the reality. Every living thing drifts towards ruin when it's left unattended. It's true of the shrubs in your yard. It's true of your own life. But I think sometimes the tension I feel with the story of David is it can be harder to relate to the redemption that David found because while he fell and ruined his life in so many ways, he also experienced a redemption that was so complete. So as we look today, here's what we're asking is how do we understand the redemption that David experienced so that we can model that in our own lives? And like I said, we'll be looking at Psalm chapter 51. You may want to grab a Bible and follow along with us there. Psalm 51 is a thing that David wrote. It's a passage that David wrote maybe possibly to be sung, but he wrote it in connection, really is kind of like a journal entry to his follow-up with the confrontation that he had with the prophet Nathan. So it's directly connected to the story, and I love that David was a writer because we get a chance to take a glimpse at what was going on, not just around David, but inside of David as he's experiencing this redemption. So he starts out in verse 1, it says this, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin." As I look at that verse, here's the first thing that I think we've got to dial into to experience the redemption that God has planned for us. We've got to understand that God's response to our sin is a reflection of his character, not a reflection of our character. God doesn't forgive and redeem me from my sin because I did something right. He forgives and redeems me from my failures based on who he is. And that's what David says, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion. So for you, if you're in this place of maybe you got some things in your life that you've ruined, maybe there's some things in your life that are unraveling right now. It's good to know that God's compassion, that God's unfailing love is what drives his forgiveness and his redemption of you, not anything that you've done to earn it. I think defining redemption is something that helps us understand how David experienced the redemption that God has for him. Redemption is when broken things are made as if they were brand new. Maybe you know someone that likes to restore old things or restore maybe cars or something like that. I have a friend who's restoring an old Mustang right now. And I love watching the updates of how it's coming together as he takes something that had been broken down, something that was literally in dozens and hundreds of different pieces, and he puts it back together as if it were brand new. And that's a picture of redemption for us. God taking us back to where we were and how we were, maybe not our life circumstances, but in our heart, in our inside life, taking us back to the way we were before things were ruined. As we look at David's journey in redemption, we realize there's some steps that he took along the way that I think are steps that we can model in our own life as we journey with the redemption that God has for us. The first one is this. You look at verse 3 of Psalm chapter 51. It says this, "For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me." The first thing I'd encourage you to do, if there's ruin in your life or next time you need to recover from some slip-ups that are causing ruin, is to be honest. Be honest with God about what's broken is the first step in him beginning to redeem that and to put it back together. What I love about this is God is already aware of our sin. It's not like we're informing him of the first time that we've made mistakes, but what we're doing when we withhold our confession, when we choose not to be honest with God about the things that are going on in our life that are causing ruin, is we actually end up sheltering those things from his redemption. Growing up, we lived on a lake, so we had a dock, and something that went hand in hand with a dock growing up was slivers. We always had slivers, whether it's in our feet or our hands or whatever. It's just kind of like it went with the territory. And my dad was the household sliver remover. That's just one of his jobs. And how he'd do it is he'd grab one of mom's sewing needles, and he would kind of use that needle to dig in and expose the sliver so it could be removed. And I remember as a kid getting slivers and feeling like, I don't want to tell dad because it's going to hurt. I don't want to tell dad about the sliver because him digging in there and removing it is going to hurt. Well, the reality is the few times that I decided not to tell dad, I discovered why it was so important for the sliver to be removed. Right? The sliver staying in there leads to infection, which causes more pain and more problems. And that's a picture of what happens in our lives when we shelter the sin, when we shelter the mistakes and the slip-ups that are causing ruin in our hearts and in the world around us. When we shelter those things from God, it leads to infection in our heart. It leads to more pain. It leads to more difficulty and more challenges. And that's why it's so key that the first thing that we do when we walk down a path that leads to ruin is we've got to be honest with God, because when we confess our sin, we're not informing God that the sin exists. Rather, what we're doing is we're coming to a position, coming to a posture of allowing God to become part of the solution. See, one thing that's a common experience to all of us is that our human nature longs for redemption. That's why we try so hard to act like life is normal, even when we're falling apart on the inside. That's why we try so hard to act like life is as it was before we invited that ruin into our lives. We pretend as long as we can because our soul aches for redemption. But here's the good news. As much as we want redemption, so does God. God longs for redemption for us as his prized creation. He longs to redeem us, and that's the good news of the gospel. That's why Jesus came. That's why he left heaven, to provide a clear road for redemption for every human and the thing that we so desperately need. Only the way we go about finding redemption and trying to go back to life the way it was before we invited that ruin is we try to pretend like it doesn't exist. On the other side, the other hand, God invites us to fully acknowledge that thing that is leading to our ruin, so not so that he can hide it, not so that he can tuck it away, but so that he can fully resolve it, so it can never rear its ugly head in our lives again. Maybe you are someone who, like me, feels like you're looking for redemption, but you've never understood why we have to talk about sin and why we have to talk about confession and why we have to talk about forgiveness in that journey. But here's what it comes down to, and we see this in the life of David. Our sin separates us from God, but God's forgiveness separates us from our sin. God's forgiveness actually disassociates our sin, our mistakes, our shortcomings with us. So here's the first thing. We've got to be honest. But the second step is this. And you see this in Psalm 51 as we journey through that chapter together. Not only do we have to be honest, but now we have to accept the gift that God has for us, and we have to walk in it. See, we can feel like when we come to God looking for redemption that we've got to beg, that we've got to plead, that we've got to somehow twist his arm into giving us the forgiveness that we so desperately long for. But what I love is when we come to God and say, God, please forgive me. His response is, okay. Right? It's not something we have to talk him into. No, he's actually anxious. He's excited and longing to forgive and redeem us. After David in Psalm 51 comes clean with God about his sin, about his shortcomings, here's the request he has for God. And we read this in chapter 51, verse 10 and 12. If you want to jump back over to the Bible section, it says this: "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me." What David understands and what you and I have to walk with in order to embrace our own redemption is that redemption is a work that only God can do. But it's also a work that only you and I can live out. Redemption is a work, it's an action that only God can do, but it's something that only you and I can live out. And here's where I think that God's plan and my plan kind of diverge a little bit. They take a Y in the road, because what I would love is for God to snap his divine fingers and just make it all okay. But that's not God's game plan. No, what he does is he redeems us in that moment, but then enables us to live out this newfound redemption moving forward. God's game plan for forgiveness is less about just fixing our past and more about embracing the future that he has planned for us. More about enabling us to live out this redeemed life. So my role in God's game plan for redemption is to walk it out. And this is why David says in verse 12, God, grant me a willing spirit. In other words, God, what I'm asking of you is for you to give me the strength to be willing to do things your way, not my way, because your way is better. We can so often feel like I said, we've got to talk God into our forgiveness. But I actually love when you look at the Bible, God uses marriage often over and over as an illustration of what our relationship with him should look like. And in this area, it's also true because as we come to God and say, God, I need you to forgive me, he says, okay, I do. And it reminds us of the words we said when we got married to our spouses, right? Marriage is something that starts in a moment, but is lived out over a lifetime. And that's a picture of your journey with redemption. It's something that starts in a moment. When you come to God and ask for his forgiveness, there's nothing more that you have to do to earn that forgiveness. However, it's also something that we live out over a lifetime. That it's not just, okay, God, forgive me, and I go back to my normal life. But no, I live out this new relationship. We live out this I do with God over a lifetime. So as we look at Psalm 51, we see that David chose to be honest with God, that he chose to accept God's gift of forgiveness and then to walk it out. But what does it look like to walk it out? You see 3 promises that David makes about how he's going to live moving forward to live out this redemption. And I love this as you see it. He says it right in the next verse. He says, I'll teach other people to follow your ways. Now, here's the good news. Not all of us are called to be public teachers about God. Not all of us need to sit on a platform or talk in front of a crowd to teach other people about God. But what I think this means is that your story matters. You telling your redemption story, what God helped you recover from, matters because it teaches other people about who God is. Your story is meant to teach other people, but I think too often we're more interested in protecting our reputation by not telling our story of how we ruined things. We're more worried about making ourselves look good than making God look good. Your ruin story matters. It teaches other people about the goodness of God and gives them the confidence that if he can restore you, if he can redeem you, he can redeem them as well. You look on, the next thing that David says, the next promise he makes in Psalm 51 is he says this, I will praise you with my words. See, I think that being vocal about how good God is, about how good he's been to us, matters. For you, that might be about putting on some worship music and singing along songs about redemption, songs about how good God is. It might be telling your kids or your family or just developing an attitude of praising God with your words, saying things in your everyday life like, thank you, Jesus. Praising God with our words becomes a powerful tool in our redemption. The last thing that David promises says this in verse 17. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. God, you will not despise. Here's what I love. David learned this through his story of ruin and redemption, that we are called to live in humility. Pastor Matt did a great job talking about last week how part of what led to David's ruin was him gaining the confidence that he was able to do it himself, gaining confidence based on all the good things that had happened in his life, that he was self-sufficient. But the reality is what David learned on the other side is that he had to live. Living out redemption means living in humility. See, in the beginning, what David forgot was that you and I and every other person on planet Earth are only a couple steps away from ruin. For David, all it took was him choosing to stay home from battle and to act on his lustful thoughts over a woman. And it led to this unraveling, this ruining of his life. And what it looks like for you and I is reality. We are only a couple of foolish decisions away from ruining our lives. But the beauty is what David discovered on the other side of that was we are only ever a couple of steps away from our redemption. Because of what Jesus did on the cross for you and me, we are only ever a couple of steps away from our redemption. So here's my question for you. Are you living in God's redemption today? That's awesome. I love it. Let's live it out together. Walk in humility. Develop an attitude of praising God and tell your redemption story as a way to teach other people about who He is. But if you're living in ruin today, here's my encouragement to you. You're only a couple steps away from redemption. Be honest with God about the areas of your life that have led to failure and choose to accept His free gift of forgiveness and to walk in it. Right now, wherever you're watching today, you can make that decision. If you're on our online experience, you can actually let us know that you're making that decision today. Right now in the chat area, there's a little area that says, I'm responding to Jesus. Click that, because we would love to walk with you in this season and to encourage and equip you to live out your redemption with God. Remember, we're only a couple steps away from ruin, but because of Jesus, you and I are only ever a couple of steps away from our redemption.
Hey, thanks for watching with us today. We're glad you're with us. Could you help us with two things real quick? One is to click on the Connect tab. And in doing so, if you'll take a few moments and fill out that card, tell us how we can pray with you, as well as how we might be able to serve you, or a response to something that maybe the Lord's been speaking to your heart today. Also, you'll see a giving tab. If you'll take just a few moments and consider giving online, we'd appreciate that, setting up online giving. It enables us not only to continue ministry behind the scenes here at Faith, but also to some of our strategic partners locally, like the Mission, that are serving some of the most vulnerable people in our community right now. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for giving.